Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah Reynolds, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for this webinar and help us guide the conversation around bringing Jeffco home and some of the challenges and opportunities that impact housing affordability here in Jefferson County. Before we begin, I do want to just go through a few housekeeping items. First, we are recording this webinar, so we do have all of our participants on mute. However, if you're familiar with Zoom, you can participate and ask questions using the chat feature in Zoom. And in fact, right now would be a great time, since we do have so many attendees on this webinar, to just take a moment and introduce yourself via the chat so we know who's here. Now, we do have some really fun interactive components that have been built into this webinar. So we'll be hearing from many of our panelists with several really important questions, but this is an opportunity for you to engage with us. So we are using a platform called Menti, and you have two ways that you can participate. If you've got your cell phone handy, you can actually snap that QR code, and that'll take you directly to our Menti site. And if you're on your computer, you also can go directly to that Menti site just through your browser. And what we're going to do is just ask you a few questions to just tee up the conversation, test what you know about housing affordability, and set a little more context for this presentation. So hopefully we have folks joining now onto the Menti, and I think we might be ready for our first question. All right, so this is a word cloud exercise. When you think about housing, what is a word or a phrase that comes to mind? Just go ahead and enter that in through Menti, and we'll see what everyone has to say. Expensive, yes. Unaffordable, a necessity. Stability, an opportunity to thrive. These are great, great words. Safe, hard to find, indeed, yes. Unattainable, unaffordable. Terrific. See a lot of very clear themes coming out of this word cloud, and we'll indeed be talking about many of these themes as we move through our presentation today. All right, so let's go to our next question. Okay, so this is testing your knowledge. Which of these developments is affordable housing? You've got three options. You have the Heights at Marston Lake, Walnut Creek Apartments, and the Fruitdale Lofts. Which of these do you think is affordable housing? We'll give folks a few more minutes to respond. We've got some clear front runners. All right, I think most folks have had a chance to participate. What's the answer? All of these are affordable housing developments. It was a trick question, so you got to be on your toes for this webinar today. So thank you, everyone, for answering that. And I think it is obviously illustrating the point that affordable housing has come a very long way, and it is often developed with the character of the community in mind, so that it is indistinguishable from market rate housing. All right, I think we have one more question on our Menti. And indeed, how much additional housing does Jefferson County still need to provide enough housing options for low and moderate income households? Which one do you think it is? Is it 6,500 units, 11,000 units, or 20,000 units? We'll just give everyone an opportunity to respond. All right, this is a very smart crowd because the correct answer is 20,000 units. So most of you guessed correctly. Fantastic job. And I believe that might be it for our Menti exercises, but Now that we have you warmed up and ready to listen, I will just go through our agenda real briefly and then introduce our first speakers. So we're going to hear a little bit about what the Colorado Gives Foundation is doing in Jefferson County to address housing affordability. And then in a few moments, I will be introducing our fantastic panelists who will lead us through their perspectives and help set some context, as well as some moderated Q&A. So again, at the very end of our presentation, there will be an opportunity for you all as attendees to ask those questions. So as you have really great questions when you're hearing from our panelists, just jot those down and we'll hopefully be able to answer those when we get to the end. So at this time, I would love to introduce Kelly Duncan with the Colorado Gives Foundation. Kelly joined Colorado Gives Foundation as president and CEO in February of 2019. And previously, she worked for a variety of nonprofit, business, and social impact organizations. These include 11 years at the Colorado Health Foundation in Denver, where she grew into the role of Vice President of Philanthropy, and 10-10-10, where she served as the National Director. 10-10-10, for those of you who are not familiar, is a project of the Colorado Nonprofit Development Center and inspires entrepreneurs to solve 10 wicked social problems. Kelly's education includes a Bachelor of Arts in English from Miami University, an elementary education licensure from the University of Northern Colorado, and a Master of Public Administration from the University of Colorado at Denver. So Kelly, thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit more about what Colorado Gives Foundation is doing in this space.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone who's joined us today. So I know many of you may know the Colorado Gives Foundation, so if you do, forgive me for introducing ourselves to those who may not know us on the webinar. So we are a community foundation, and our mission is to connect people, ideas, and nonprofits to make good happen. And we do that in two primary ways. First, we do work statewide, and we work statewide to build the capacity of nonprofits and donors. We do that by offering donor services like donor advised funds. We steward nonprofit endowments, and we're also starting to work with more and more workplaces to help them engage in the community. And we also have an online giving platform, Colorado Gives 365, that we use to support nonprofits all year long, and also on Colorado Gives Day, which, shameless plug, please mark your calendars. It's December 5th this year. In addition to working statewide, we also work in Jefferson County. And our work in Jefferson County is to ensure that all of Jeffco is thriving. And annually, we grant over $9 million in 4 impact areas: essential needs, economic prosperity, connected and resilient neighborhoods, and civic engagement. And so if you go to the next slide, our work in Jefferson County is rooted in attentive listening. We really want to understand what are the needs or problems that the community wants to address, and what are the opportunities that they want to take advantage of. And so we couldn't go anywhere over the last couple of years without hearing about how the rising cost of housing was making it really difficult for Jeffco workers, for anyone in Jeffco really, to live and work in Jefferson County. And so if you go to the next slide, I'll tell you what we did to understand the problem. So we recognized that housing affordability was increasingly becoming a problem. People were getting priced out of living close to where they worked, or priced out of living in the community where they grew up. And we wanted to understand what was the problem, because we knew that we certainly did not have the resources to address the entirety of the problem. So we wanted to understand it better so we could decide where we could focus to make the biggest difference. So we commissioned a study. You'll hear a little bit more about that study in a minute from Jonna Lynn. We commissioned a study by Centrinsic. Centrinsic did the study for us, and from that study, we recognized that housing was becoming increasingly unaffordable because of a supply issue. We had a recession in 2008. We cut way back on building additional housing units, and we never quite caught up. And so it's basic economics. When you have a dwindling supply and increasing demand, prices are going to go up. And we saw that across the housing continuum. But we also recognized that we couldn't address the full continuum. And so we wanted to identify where we could make the biggest difference. And for us, we thought that was increasing the supply, or even preserving the supply of housing that was affordable for Jeffco's essential workforce. Think about our teachers, our nurses, healthcare workers, firefighters, police officers, nonprofit leaders in Jefferson County. We thought if we could focus there, we could make the biggest difference, because we recognize that while we may not have enough low-income housing tax credits, if a project could get low-income housing tax credits, it was financially viable. They could build low-income housing, and market rate. Developers were going to make money. They would build market rate housing. Unfortunately, the market rate was just increasingly too expensive for most of our essential workers. So we focused on what they call the missing middle housing stock. So housing stock that will serve essential workers. And we decided we would do 3 different things to address that issue. One, we would use financing. We would take a portion of our endowment and seed a fund. We put $15 million into that fund to provide below market rate financing to either preserve or increase supply of housing that's affordable for essential workforce. And we also thought we needed to do some public education and engagement. We recognize that people have very strong feelings about development and growth, but we really wanted to understand, does everyone have those strong feelings against? Is everyone for? Or where do people lie? And how can we help educate the community so we could understand where we could make traction on ensuring that our essential workforce could live and work here? And that led to advocacy. So working with our elected officials, our appointed officials, to understand what are some policy changes that could make it easier to either preserve or increase that supply. And so we launched the Bring It Home Fund. We're investing in projects. We've already done 2. I'm really excited about the project we just invested in, Vance Street Lofts. We've convened a steering committee that's helping to inform us around what policies can change. We're doing this webinar series as part of that public education and engagement. So we'll talk more about this at the end, but at a quick overview, this is what we're doing and why we're here today. And we're thrilled to have you with us to learn more about housing.
Fantastic.
And now, thanks, Sarah.
Oh. Yes, thank you, Kelly. Thank you for your leadership with Colorado Gives Foundation. This is such a critical issue, and certainly that set fabulous context for the rest of our conversation this morning. I also want to point out for folks in the chat, we're going to be dropping some helpful resources into that chat. So be sure to grab those links so that you can learn more about this topic as we move forward. Now, at this time, I'd like to introduce our amazing panel that we have joining us today. We are going to be hearing from 3 just terrific speakers who are going to help set context, share a little bit of their expertise, and lead us through this topic of housing affordability. So first, we'll be hearing from Jonalyn Denlinger, and she is an impact consultant with Centrinsic, which is a Colorado-based investment firm specializing in strategic investment consulting to help nonprofits and foundations fulfill their mission. Jonalyn joined Centrinsic in February 2021, where she supports foundations, funds, and individuals in their organizational development, team building, and impact investing strategy. She's been working with Colorado Gives Foundation on their housing work, first through their housing study, which we'll hear a little bit more about, and now through the implementation of the Bring It Home Fund. We will also be hearing from Kathy Alderman. Kathy is the Chief Communications and Public Policy Officer for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, where she is responsible for public and media relations, lobbying activities, social media, publications, community engagement, public outreach, and education. That is a lengthy list for Kathy. During her almost 8 years at CCH, Kathy has successfully advocated for state and local housing resources that result in first-time housing and homelessness investments in both Denver and throughout Colorado. She currently serves on the board of directors for the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and she served as the appointed vice chair subpanel for the interim Colorado Affordable Housing Transformational Task Force in 2021 through 2022, which directed more than $600 million in American Rescue Plan funds for housing and homelessness. And then finally, we're going to hear from Commissioner Leslie Dahlkemper. Leslie's career has focused on what she loves most: helping people, solving complex problems, and giving back to our community. Her 30 years of experience includes serving as a senior level executive in both private and nonprofit sectors with a focus on K-12 education. She also founded a national award-winning communications firm. Her career began as a journalist for Colorado Public Radio, where she contributed stories to both NPR and BBC and won national awards for investigative, documentary, and feature reporting. Leslie was reelected as a Jefferson County Commissioner in 2022. She's one of two county commissioners appointed by Governor Polis to serve on the Colorado Wildfire Commission and chairs Jeffco's Wildfire Commission as well as the Gateway to the Rockies Regional Opioid Council. She serves as treasurer on the board of directors for Colorado Counties, Inc., in addition to multiple national, state, and local boards. She is the past president, and she is also the past president of Jeffco School Board. She's originally from Chicago, and Leslie moved to Denver in 1989 to work as a reporter after earning her master's degree in journalism from the University of Illinois. Leslie and her family have called Jefferson County home for 27 years. So we have three extremely busy and accomplished folks who are joining us today. So without further delay, we will go ahead and get some opening comments from our first panelist, Jonalyn. Jonalyn, you started this project with Colorado Gives about 12 months ago. So tell us a little bit more about how you have engaged in this project.
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's been absolutely wonderful to work with Colorado Gives Foundation on their housing work over the last few years, first with this study and then now with the Bring It Home Fund. So as mentioned, we partner with Colorado Gives to complete the housing study in early 2022. And there were kind of four major things we were looking for. One, to help determine affordable housing needs in Jeffco, identify existing efforts, define the gaps, and then, as Kelly has already mentioned, kind of identifying the strategies that the foundation could take in order to remedy those gaps in Jeffco. I thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit about kind of the methodology of our study, and also to take this time publicly to thank many of you on this call who participated in the building of the study. So we worked with Colorado Gives to identify key stakeholders to inform the study. We conducted over 30 formal interviews, again, with some of you on this call, so thank you. These interviews included representatives regionally and nationally from philanthropic organizations, public entities, nonprofit leaders, business leaders, and community voices. We looked at existing data at the state and county level, really trying to build on the work that others have done. And we prioritized with the key question of what can Colorado Gives Foundation do to address affordable housing in Jefferson County. And there were 5 findings. We're going to go more deeply into those throughout this conversation. But one, affordable housing impacts the health and wealth of the entire community, not just individuals, which we'll talk more about in a bit. As Kelly mentioned, we learned that the supply of housing is less than the demand, which drives up prices and really impacts the ability to find housing across income levels in Jefferson County. We found that wages do not meet costs of housing, whether renting or looking to purchase a home. And again, as Kelly mentioned, true across income levels, including essential workers. In addition, we found public policy and zoning either impede or enhance the expansion of affordable housing in Jeffco. And this greatly impacted both developer appetite in Jefferson County as to whether a developer would want to come and develop affordable housing, but also the funding of affordable housing, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And lastly, we discovered that there's a lack of shared understanding of both the problems and opportunities for affordable housing. And this in and of itself is really a barrier to increasing affordable housing in Jefferson County. And those findings really moved Colorado Gives to the 3 strategies that Kelly talked about: the Bring It Home Fund, the narrative change work, and public policy work. And throughout this presentation, we'll kind of touch on different parts of the finding in the study and talk a little bit about what we've learned since implementing the Bring It Home Fund.
Terrific. Jonalyn, thank you so much for giving us that overview of the housing study and what those key findings were. Next, we'd like to hear from Kathy Alderman with CCH. Kathy, I know CCH has a really large footprint in the state, and not only are you working with partners across the whole housing continuum, but you also have a lot of perspective from working with state lawmakers and really adjusting some of those solutions from a statewide perspective. So please share us a little bit more.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you to Colorado Gives and the Bell Policy Center for having me today, and appreciate everyone who's been able to join. The Colorado Coalition for the Homeless really believes in lasting solutions for homelessness, meaning that we really do focus in on the housing solution, because the homelessness crisis is the housing crisis, or is certainly part of the housing crisis. And when we think about resolving homelessness for folks that are currently in that cycle, or for folks that are at risk of that cycle, we really focus on two elements. One is the resolution of homelessness. What can we do to bring people out of that cycle and into housing with supportive services so they have the opportunity to thrive long term? But we also have to think about prevention, stopping the flow of households into homelessness. And I think that's where this conversation is really relevant today, because what we're seeing in the state of Colorado is that in addition to the 10 to 55,000 people that are experiencing homelessness today, we are seeing an increase in the number of households falling into the cycle of homelessness because they're losing their homes. In fact, in 2022, there were just under 46,000 evictions. Most evictions are because people are unable to pay their rent. Most people are unable to pay their rent because rent increases at a rate much higher than wages. And so they lose their homes. In fact, in the Metro Denver area, which includes Jefferson County, we saw a 52% increase in first-time homelessness and 120% increase in family homelessness. These are individuals and households that are falling into homelessness the first times. And these are the very populations of people that we were talking about today. These are our frontline workers whose wages just simply can't keep up with the cost of housing. And the reason why this is so important for this conversation is that, as we know, we have a homelessness response system that is underfunded and can hardly manage the number of people in the cycle today. As we see more and more households falling into the cycle of homelessness and losing their home, where we don't have much more resources to address them. And it can be very difficult to maintain employment, to maintain your health if you don't have housing. And so one of the things that we think is really important is that the pressure of not having middle income housing means that we don't have enough housing for those lower income households, because households at higher incomes are renting down and households at lower incomes are being forced to rent up, meaning that they're spending more on their household costs than they can truly afford, and that is really financially sound for them. And it's why private investment in middle income housing or missing middle housing is so very important. Because of the limited public resources that we have to target those resources for low income households and getting people out of the cycle of homelessness. But private investment and philanthropic investment can really make a difference in that middle income housing to take some of that pressure off the households that need housing the most. Just in addition to saying that, we knew how many evictions there were in 2022, the state of Colorado needs more than 120,000 units of affordable housing for the households that are in greatest need. That includes those 20,000 units in Jefferson County. And so if we have populations falling into the cycle, losing their housing at rates higher than what we're able to build for, we're just never going to be able to solve this crisis. And it's why partners like Colorado Gives, and other private and philanthropic partners are going to be such a critical part of solving this part of the crisis for us.
Fantastic, Kathy. That really set context, had a big picture of what's happening around the state. Now, our next panelist is Commissioner Dahlkemper. And Commissioner, I know you have a real diverse range of expertise, housing being one of many issue areas that you're very, very passionate about, but you really do also understand what the needs are in Jefferson County. So tell us a little bit more about what's happening locally.
Sarah, thanks so much. And huge thanks to Colorado Gives and the Bell Policy Center for hosting today's conversation about housing. You're right, Colorado and Jefferson County are at a crossroads. We've got housing supply that's low, costs are high, rents continue to increase. It's just the perfect storm of issues. And we also know that housing should cost no more than 30% of a household's income, but the reality is strikingly different. And the result, as we've heard, is that families and individuals are pushed out of neighborhoods that they've called home for generations. I also want to underscore that it's an issue of racial, ethnic, and social equity as well, and that needs to be a cornerstone of our conversation. Studies show that Black and Latinx renters are more cost burdened than white renters, and that's why those of us coming together to tackle these issues as partners, it's so critical. Another factor for Jefferson County is that we have one of the fastest aging populations in the state, and that adds additional challenges for elderly adults, especially those on a fixed income. So the challenges are numerous in Jefferson County and across the state, as we've heard from some of our other panelists, but they're not insurmountable. And I'd love to share just a couple of quick examples with you. For example, we know that communities that limit density along public transportation, retail corridors, hinder affordable housing opportunities. Wheat Ridge is a great example of a community that has committed funds and land to housing along the bustling Wadsworth corridor. Jeffco and the state also contributed funding to this effort. Another challenge that we face is a shortage in housing vouchers. The good news is that our Foothills Regional Housing Authority is one of the top performers in the nation in awarding emergency housing vouchers, thanks to partnerships, including working with groups like Family Tree, which allowed Jefferson County and Foothills to work even faster to secure housing dollars to help people. And we know that there are few shelters and funding to temporarily house individuals, community members, neighbors during the navigation process. There are challenges that come with that. But in Jefferson County, we've earmarked American Rescue Plan Act dollars, federal dollars, for 2 navigation centers that really would create a campus of care and support, including emergency shelter, transitional housing, and affordable housing, with all those key wraparound services being provided as well in 2 locations, Arvada and Lakewood. We have other complications too, including medically fragile health conditions, untreated mental health challenges, substance use issues too. I think it's important to share, you mentioned that I chair the Gateway to the Rockies Opioid Council, that the council has made recovery housing one of our top priorities in our region, which includes Jeffco, Gilpin, and Clear Creek counties, for the allocation of those opioid settlement dollars. Jeffco also relies on federal entitlement funds and private activity bonds to fund affordable housing development. And we support annually the creation or preservation of up to 150 units. But it's also important to note that for the county, it's much more than just funding. That's critical, no question about it. But it's also taking a proactive approach to providing services and coordination within existing resources. And our team, led by Kat Douglas at Jefferson County Human Services, and all of our partners really make tremendous strides in that area. And we're so grateful for their leadership and for their work. The other issue I would like to touch on briefly is Tabor. Tabor limits further impact our ability to apply for funding that support housing and homeless needs, especially state funding. I'll also mention that Jeffco launched the Housing Continuum Task Force to lead a 15-year comprehensive housing plan. It's the first of its kind, from homelessness to home ownership countywide, and it will also factor in existing studies and initiatives happening in our communities, including municipalities, and work by our partners as well. I joined the Jeffco Housing Advocacy Steering Committee to work with partners to transform our housing leadership, our housing landscape. Really grateful for the leadership of Colorado Gives. Commissioner Kraft Tharp, who's with us this morning, also serves on the Housing Advocacy Committee, along with Senator Zenzinger and mayors and many others. It's an important committee because our work is really about engaging all elected officials and partners from across the county to identify common challenges, and then also to work together on solutions. We're exploring lots of different policy areas like land use and zoning, market-based development tools that encourage or require income-restricted housing, and more revenue sources to support workforce housing. So that's a little bit about the challenges, some of the solutions in Jefferson County, and also a bit more on the work we're doing on the Housing Advocacy Steering Committee. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think your point is so well taken, that while there are a lot of challenges, there are also so many good things happening to help address these challenges. And in particular, some of those partnerships that you highlighted. It takes many stakeholders to solve this issue, and you're just really grateful for the leadership that you've shown on this as well. All right, so we're going to dive into some of our questions here. And the first is, I'm actually going to go to Jonna Lynn. When we first did the housing needs assessment study, it was about 12 months ago. So in the past 12 months, what have we learned since that study was completed?
Yeah, I'll start first, and then I know everyone else on this panel has more to add to it as well. But the findings of this study continue to ring true. As Colorado Gives is implementing its 3-prong approach. We continue to have many conversations with developers and nonprofits, and we're continuing to hear the following things. One, the importance of land use and zoning is a #1 challenge both for new construction and conversion or updating of existing affordable housing. We've heard this from developers and nonprofit partners, really attempting to build new diverse housing products and retain existing products, as well, interestingly, as organizations attempting to sell land with the intention for affordable housing, really kind of thinking through how does that zoning happen in order to make this possible and viable for affordable housing. Secondly, high inflation and increased interest rates have impacted all of us, but really have impacted individuals as well as companies and organizations trying to build out a diverse housing market. Obviously, as individuals, this impacts the cost of debt and mortgages to purchase homes, but also the cost of other essential needs such as food and healthcare, which really impacts their ability to spend their earnings on rent or a mortgage. Additionally, it's increased the cost to build or renovate for developers and nonprofit partners. And we're really seeing a need for different kinds of capital, such as bridge loans and low-cost capital to really help support the increased costs that these developers are experiencing. That's why the Bring It Home Fund, which offers low-cost capital, is to build new and preserve affordable housing, is so crucial. And lastly, I'll just mention, we've seen an increased urgency around the missing middle on a national level and a regional level. It's becoming a significant workforce challenge to attract and retain employees from the employer perspective, and really difficult to find places to afford that are near their work for employees. So we're actually seeing some unique problem solving on a policy level, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but also, again, the philanthropic solutions such as the Bring It Home Fund.
Great, Jonalyn, that was super helpful. Kathy, Kelly, anything that you'd like to add to that in terms of just what's been learned over the last 12 months and just how conditions may have changed on the ground?
I can just add in from a policy perspective. Many of you, I'm sure, were following very closely along with the land use bill that was proposed in the Colorado legislature this year. And while that bill did not make it through, it's likely that we're going to see pieces and parts of that come through to, really talk about a more comprehensive statewide strategy for how we use land use. But one of the things that I would argue is that when we start thinking about land use and zoning and density and, parking requirements and height restrictions, we really have to think about affordability. Because we can build, and in fact, in many places in Colorado, we have built and built and built, but we haven't made sure that any of that housing is affordable. And so what we have now in many parts of the city of Denver are housing that sits empty because it's not affordable. And so if you're not intentional about making the new builds, especially if you're allowing for greater density or around transit, if that new build isn't affordable, it's not going to solve the affordable housing crisis. And in fact, it's going to make it worse. And so during land use conversations, you'll hear a number of affordable housing advocates like the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless really push for affordability requirements, whether that's covenants for long-term affordability or subsidies to ensure that housing is restricted to households at certain incomes. We think that is a critical component to any land use policy changes. We also have to think about anti-displacement and ensuring that we're not displacing households and building housing that those households we displaced couldn't afford in their old neighborhoods. We're losing so much cultural and economic diversity in so many of our neighborhoods through displacement measures because what the type of land that is seen as inexpensive is where many of these households live today. And then we're making that land absolutely unaffordable for them moving forward. And so we have to also think about how do we ensure we're not displacing neighborhoods and households when we start thinking about changing zoning and allowing for greater density.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. Well, speaking of headlines, I know there's been a lot of news lately around funding for more housing affordability. And specifically, last year in Colorado, we passed Prop 123, which is estimated to provide about $300 million annually to address this lack of housing affordability. So I think it's a very fair question. why, with all this new funding coming in, why isn't funding enough for us to be able to solve this affordable housing crisis? It's a lot of resources that are new. So why is the problem still a challenge, even with funding available? And so, Kathy, I'm going to have you start with that question.
Sure. I think it's really important to understand the funding context and history in Colorado. So prior to 2017, the state of Colorado was investing about $8 million a year in affordable housing development. Now, there were federal funds that were passing through certain agencies to allow for different development, but the state itself wasn't making any investments in affordable housing. Oh, they were $8 million. And then in 2017, the state allocated about $15 million of marijuana tax cash revenue for people exiting certain systems, the criminal legal system, the foster care system, mental health systems, to land in supportive housing with subsidies and vouchers. And then in 2018, there was an increase in that $8 million to about $9 million. So we saw $1 million increase in investments in affordable housing. Finally, in 2019, we did secure two sources of sustainable funding for housing. One was through the vendor fee, and that money just started becoming available about 2 years ago. We secured another funding source through the Unclaimed Property Fund that still hasn't been made available, which would have been $30 million each year for 3 years, but it's only available in non-TABOR tax refund years, which we haven't had since 2018. So that funding is just sitting there waiting to be tapped into. In 2022, we were able to use American Rescue Plan Act funds. As Sarah mentioned in my introduction, we directed about $650 million to housing and homelessness. Those are one-time funds and they have to be spent by 2026. So we're coming up on the end of those funds. So that's why Prop 123 was so critically important to be passed by the voters in 2022, because it will help to kind of take care of this cliff that we're going to experience from these American Rescue Plan Act funds. But it's certainly not enough, and it certainly doesn't cover how far behind the state of Colorado is in funding affordable housing. And so we need to continually advocate for and look for additional revenue sources that may be allowed by TABOR to get us to a place where we're making the kinds of investments in housing for low-income households, for middle-income households, that can be sustainable and that can really address this gap that we've accrued over the years.
Great, thank you, Kathy. So Kelly, I'm going to follow up with you and talk a little bit about the missing middle and why, what that is and why that's been a focus area of the Colorado Gives Foundation.
Yeah, when we say missing middle, it's a type of housing stock. So the missing middle housing stock is housing, whether it's rental or ownership, that is affordable to individuals or families who are living on incomes at about 60 to 120% area median income. And that translates, depending on family size, to about $50,000 to $120,000 a year. And so Proposition 123 is a huge boon to housing in Colorado. And while it is money we've never had towards housing, I think, as Kathy alluded, it's certainly not sufficient to address the totality of the problem, but it is a huge step in helping us get there. And most of that housing will focus on families living on lower incomes. But there is, I said most of the funding is for housing for families living on the lower end of that income bracket. So even with Proposition 123, there's still a need for additional below market rate investment to serve those families who make enough money. They would have what we would have in the past thought of as middle income jobs, but it's no longer sufficient for them to be able to afford even rent in Jefferson County. So we will continue to focus on that missing middle housing stock, and we'll look at how we can take advantage of opportunities like Proposition 123. We just talked yesterday about there's the Middle Income Housing Authority that can also provide financing that can make these housing, make this housing more affordable to build in Colorado. So I think even with the additional revenue that we're going to see in housing, we still need a little bit more to help get the projects off the ground that are going to serve our essential workforce. And that's where we think the Bring It Home Fund can be additive to the work that's already happening.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. I think that's an important definition that we're going to be hearing a lot more about, both that missing middle as well as those essential workers that can no longer afford to live in Jefferson County. So my next question is actually regarding just some of those intersections around housing. So let's talk a little bit about why being in a home that you can afford has many more benefits than simply just a place to live. And, specifically, what are some of the other social benefits that we see when in the community when there are more affordable housing options for the folks who live here? So I'm going to start with Commissioner Dahlkemper to tell us about some of those benefits of affordable housing beyond just having a safe and stable place to call home, and how the community really benefits.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. As a county commissioner, I talk regularly with our constituents across Jefferson County, from the foothills to the plains. And a number of the constituents I talk with rely heavily on services and programs from Jeffco Human Services, nonprofits like the Action Center, Mountain Resource Center, ECHO, Community Table, and others across Jeffco for services like food and housing rental assistance, as well as school supplies, as we know at the beginning of the school year. Because when households are spending so much on housing, they have to cut back on other basic needs. Those needs might include childcare, transportation, food, even medication. And we know that that's unsustainable, and it places families at risk in Jeffco. They're forced to decide whether they're going to pay rent or buy groceries, purchase school supplies, or pay for medication. And these are very difficult, hard choices for our neighbors. Housing stability also has a major impact on learning. So when families move less frequently, we see less classroom turnover. And that's a really important piece for student learning. Students also become part of the school community, as do their families, and housing stability leads to less disruption in learning. That's key. Let's talk too about community health. We know housing stability allows families to more easily access healthcare. And another key component of that is staying up to date on those doctor visits and preventative care as well. It also has an impact on local economies. Small business leaders like Megan Mitchell, she heads a restaurant called Cactus Jack's up in Evergreen, is continuing to struggle, like other business owners, with recruiting and retaining employees because of the cost of housing affordability. It's just incredibly difficult. So it has a direct impact on our local economies as well. We can't work in isolation on these issues, and that's why it's always wonderful to hear about the partnerships that are happening across Jefferson County. And one of my favorites that's tied to the impact and the safety net of services is the Avi Affordable Housing Initiative in Arvada, which not too long ago garnered statewide recognition for its work. It's a unique effort involving young adults in CASA who are now transitioning out of foster care, as well as homeless veterans, and workforce housing is provided as well. And it really reflects individuals who are between that 30 to 80% AMI, as we talk about the missing middle and more. What's wonderful about this initiative is that there are wraparound support services on site provided to residents who need them. And that's really critical for success. And it's also another example of tremendous partnership involving Foothills Regional Authority, Lori Rosendahl, CASA, Jefferson County, and many other partners as well. So that partnership really makes a big difference as we tackle issues around the importance of housing stability and what it means for our children, for families, education, local economies, and much, much more, even healthcare.
Great. That was a wonderful answer. Thank you so much for not just sharing that perspective, but really celebrating those partnerships and those trailblazers that are making such a positive difference in the community. For our other panelists, anything else that you want to add to just those broader community benefits when housing is more affordable?
I think I would just like to add that obviously housing is critical for individual health, and it is critical for community health, and it is critical for the stability of households and children. but it's also a better use of our taxpayer funding, right? So when people are using emergency systems like shelters, like emergency rooms, or even the criminal legal system, which so many people who fall into the cycle of homelessness end up using, we're spending twice as much by letting people languish through those systems than we would if we just housed those individuals and provided supportive services. So it's frankly a better use of community wealth to provide housing with supportive services than it is to allow households to fall into the cycle of homelessness and be forced to use emergency services. I'll also say the same for rental assistance programs. It is so much less expensive to help a household out with a 1 month rent or 2 months rent than it is to let them lose their housing and try to regain housing with all of the upfront costs that has. So I continually make the argument that we should be providing better housing options for folks because it is the best thing to do for individuals and households, but it's also the best thing to do for our community and for the way that we spend our very limited public resources.
Yeah, excellent point, Kathy. I appreciate that. Well, we're at the point in our agenda where we can go ahead and take some questions from our audience. So for those of you who are participating, just use that chat feature in the Zoom and you can submit your questions and we'll get to as many of these as we can. But while we are waiting for some of those questions to come in, I've got one final question for Kelly. Again, with Colorado Gives Foundation stepping into such a great leadership role on this topic, for the folks who are listening in today or watching the recording, what are some great ways for just the average citizen to get involved in this effort?
Yeah, thank you very much. One, you can always reach out to us and we'd love to engage you in any of the work that we are doing. I think you're taking the first step by participating in a webinar and learning more about the issue. Graham was great. He chatted in the link to our website. I'll chat it in one more time so no one has to scroll through that. You can go on to our website. You can sign up to get added to our mailing list. We'll continually send information. If you are of the donor persuasion and you would like to donate some money to help solve the issue, we do have the Bring It Home Fund. There's several different ways you can make a contribution. And I think you may say, I only have $100 to give. It doesn't matter. It's not going to make a difference. But if everyone in Jeffco could give $100, think what we could do with that in terms of bringing down the cost of building housing that would be affordable for our essential workers. So you can always make a donation. You can join our mailing list and stay informed. You can attend future webinars. And if you want to engage in some advocacy or showing up to talk to your elected officials, we have some messaging toolkits that will be on our website soon. And we're looking to engage individuals who want to learn more and want to get connected to groups in their communities who are looking at this issue and helping to make smarter decisions for the individuals who keep our economy and our communities going.
Great, thank you, Kelly. So I see we do have one question that has come through on the chat, and this is actually it's a more technical question, and we'll do our best to answer it. And the question is, how can we as city leaders help change construction defect laws at the state level that will encourage developers to build condos and other multifamily products for the missing middle housing stock? Who would like to take a first stab at that?
I'll take a first crack at that one.
Great, thanks.
Thanks so much. I think it was Sharon who might have asked that question. Really appreciate that. It's an issue that's top of mind because we know one of the biggest challenges is that it's difficult not only for people to afford housing, but to build equity. And the construction defect laws have been a challenge and an important part of this conversation. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe there is a bill that is coming up in the 2024 legislative session on this issue. My best advice to you is to work with your state legislators on that bill and also to raise concerns, questions with them on this particular issue.
Terrific answer. And I think that's actually, I have a follow-up question on that as well, because I think, it's particularly folks who maybe are not involved in government or politics, they often don't know where to go when they want to speak to some of their elected leaders. And so, so I'd love some perspective and tips maybe from you, Commissioner, as well as Kathy, on how folks can engage with their elected officials, and, you know, who are they? What are the best ways to reach out to them so that our elected leaders can hear from their constituents on a more regular basis about how this is impacting the community? So who would like to go first?
I'm happy to kick it off. I think to Commissioner Dahlkemper's point, knowing who your state legislators are is really critical. I'm going to drop a link here in the chat in just a minute of our kind of quick guide for getting involved in the legislative process, which provides you lots of tools to find out who that person is. You can get on their mailing list and make sure you're attending any of the town halls that they hold when they're not in session, and make sure that you, are letting them know what issues are important to you. And in this document that I'll be providing, there's also a way for how to get involved during legislative session. Because of the COVID crisis, getting involved has never been easier, frankly, because we can now do remote testimony. You can do written testimony on all of the issues that are important to you. And there are some pretty easy tools that are a little wonky, so that you can follow along and see which bills are coming up on which days and which subject matters they address. And so I think, this kind of quick guide that I'll drop here in the chat, I hope will be a good resource for folks to at least get started and then get connected to organizations that do advocacy work. I'm going to make a plug for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. We do a lot of advocacy work. We put out legislative priorities. We put out reports on important issues. And we always encourage folks to use the materials that we put out to help resolve issues related to housing, to healthcare, economic justice. And so we would love to have you as part of our network as well.
Terrific. Commissioner, anything to add?
Sure, I'll just briefly add, we love it when our constituents reach out to us and share their perspective on different issues. And it helps to inform the policy decisions that we make. Two quick things. I put in the chat how best to reach the Board of County Commissioners at our website address. Our email address, commish@jeffco.us. Also, we invite you to come visit us during public comment if an issue is especially important to you. Our meetings start at 9 a.m. on Tuesdays, and you can go to our website at jeffco.us for the schedule as well. One of our best examples of how we're tackling issues regarding land use, and I saw a question from Sean Maley related to housing supply shortage, is our Together Jeffco initiative at togetherjeffco.com. I'll put this in the chat as well. It is a major initiative, one that we have never tackled before, and it's so critical to the future of communities in Jefferson County because it looks at how we grow and develop. What is our vision for that as a community? And how does that impact the very conversation we're having right now about housing affordability? There are lots of opportunities to weigh in via surveys. We have public meetings happening this month. The schedule is again at togetherjeffco.com, and we'll have even more opportunities in the future. So hopefully we'll hear from more of you on that initiative as well.
That's great. That's great. And I really commend Colorado in general for having such a great culture of transparency when it comes to elected office. Our elected officials are extremely accessible. And when they say they want to hear from their constituents, they really mean that. So definitely encourage everyone on the call to know who your elected officials are and be active in terms of reaching out to them and sharing your concerns. Now we have another question in the chat regarding our steering committee, and I might pose this to Kelly. So one of the questions is, who's on the steering committee, as well as how we are engaging employers through the steering committee, because obviously there's a lot of partners in solving this workforce housing issue. And certainly steering committee is one starting point on that, but Kelly, maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thank you, Mindy. So I'll start with who's on the steering committee. So the steering committee has representation from elected officials. So Commissioner Dahlkemper, Commissioner Kraft-Tharp is on there. We have Mayor Adam Paul, Mayor Bud Starker, Mayor Laura Weinberg, and Mayor Mark Williams are also serving on the steering committee. Jeffco EDC is represented, Arvada Chamber of Commerce, Foothills Regional Housing Authority, Zocalo, and Independent developer, Edgewater Collective, an advocacy coalition, Impact Development, Community Development Financial Institution, Mercy Housing. So we have great representation on that steering committee. And yes, we just hosted a lunch last Monday, invited all of the large employers in Jeffco to attend that lunch so we could understand how they view housing. Is it an issue for them? Is it hurting their employees? And what is it they want to do to get engaged? And we're following up with each of those employers individually to find different ways to engage them, whether it's participating by donating to the fund to help increase the supply, whether it's joining with other employers to maybe even help to construct some housing for their employees, or as we're looking at policy changes or development opportunities in different municipalities or unincorporated Jeffco, getting the viewpoint of those employers and their employees and sharing that with the elected or appointed officials who are making those decisions.
Terrific. Thank you, Kelly. And again, partnerships are how all of this is going to happen. So appreciate all the work that you've done on this, and as well as the members of that steering committee. They're a really great group of people. So we are nearing the end of our webinar today. And so we have one last opportunity for you all to engage with us with one final Menti. So again, we're going to go back to that site that you all had gone to at the beginning of the presentation. It's right there on the screen, menti.com, and the code is 71226280. So go ahead and open in browser and join us. But as we are thinking to the future, we would love to hear from you on some of the things you would like to learn more about in some of these future webinars that we'll be hosting. It's important to note that we have a whole webinar series scheduled under the Colorado Gives Foundation, talking about different dynamics around housing affordability. So there's many other topics that you're going to have an opportunity to learn about through this webinar series. So we do encourage you to visit that resources site on the Colorado Gives website that has been linked in the chat, so you can see what that schedule for those webinars are, as well as what those topics are. And certainly share this information. You have colleagues, you have neighbors, you have friends, you have other parents that maybe go to school with your kiddos. There's so many ways that you can spread the word about these opportunities to engage and learn more about housing affordability. So spread the word and share these opportunities with the folks in your world as well, so that we can just continue to educate the community about this important issue. All right, so we've got a few answers coming in, really great responses about resources for the community members. How do you make a difference at the local level? The Together Jeffco initiative that Commissioner Donkumper mentioned, that's a great one. What are those quick wins? Those things that might be low-hanging fruit that we can work on. And of course, also understanding that there's differences of opinion in the community, where there are certain members of our community who, sometimes have concerns about development. And so how do we engage those voices? And again, just use that education and that proactive outreach to engage folks in constructive conversations. Great question about modular homes. That's a really intriguing question. And certainly all those topics are all part of the conversation around affordable housing. All right. Well, we are almost to the top of our hour. So again, thank you everyone for your contributions to our Menti. This is a real fun way to engage with everyone. I'm really pleased to report that we had nearly 70 people register to attend this webinar. So it speaks to what a broad concern this topic is in the community and how many people do want to get involved. So again, just please consider going to that website for the Colorado Gives Foundation. Check out the resources that are available for you. Kelly mentioned some toolkits, as well as other information on our speaker series. So definitely give that a look. Our next webinar is on November 9th, and the topic is going to be on the intersections of housing with childcare, healthcare, education, and workforce. So I think we're going to be diving deeper into some of those themes that we talked about today. So again, thank you to our presenters, our panelists. You all are just terrific experts on this topic. Really covered a lot of ground in just an hour. So thank you for sharing your expertise with our attendees. And then last but not least, thank you to all of our attendees. We know that everyone is very busy, and taking time to learn more about this issue and how it affects your community is very important. And really want to commend all of you for prioritizing this in your day and joining us. So thank you again to our host, Bell Policy and Colorado Gives, for convening us. And again, this webinar will be recorded and on the Colorado Gives website for those who might have missed us. So thank you everyone for being here, and we will wrap up our webinar.